with you all and to share with you in the breakfast. I was involved as vicar at St Matthew's from 1990 right through to 2013. That's now St Matthew's and St Oswald's, and it's great to see some faces here that are here virtually all of that time. I came into rugby from an evangelical charismatic tradition within the Anglican Church, but had fairly extensive experience of an Anglo-Catholic approach and also rural ministry prior to my time in rugby. And I'd always kind of got on easily with people across the spectrum, and I guess had an understanding of where people were coming from churchmanship and theological perspectives. But as I tell this story, as I've said already, I'm glad that David Spademan's here zooming with us, because in the development of Revive, he played a key part, so he can correct my errors and my biases if he needs to. But the first thing I want to say, that I want us to leave with as well, is that Revive was founded on relationships rather than activities. It was the relationships between church leaders that was key. The activities grew out of relationships of trust and respect for each other. And that is absolutely key. And the other key point, and it's great to see it's still on the Revive website, where it talks about what is Revive about. And it starts off with the phrase, it is a move of God. And I think that we realized pretty quickly was what was going on. That move of God seen in, I guess, in the makeup and the call of the individuals involved, and then in the way that we were able to relate to others in a wider circle and an increasing range of traditions. In the 1990s, when I arrived, there was a traditional ecumenical group in the town. It was quite active, but in my opinion, Brian Coleman might disagree. In my opinion, it was a bit stale. And many of the non-conformist and new churches were simply not involved. Probably the traditional churches didn't even know they existed. Some of them have voted with their feet. They'd certainly voted with their theology, and were not involved in the formal ecumenical activities within the town. But because of my history, and I think the position of St. Matthew's in the town, I ended up having a foot in both camps. I was involved with the traditional formal ecumenism, but I also had good relationships with some of the evangelical churches and the free churches, the house churches. And then in 1999, so I'd been in rugby by then 9 years, David, who was the pastor at the Assemblies of God on Lawford Road, and I developed a friendship. And interestingly, that friendship grew out of a prophetic word that David's wife, Debbie, received for me whilst I was on sabbatical in 1998. When I arrived back from a sabbatical, I had this letter from a woman I'd never heard of. To be perfectly, I was looking. I've kept the letter, but I was looking for it yesterday. I just can't find it, so I can't remember too much of what it actually said. But it was significant in creating, giving us an understanding of God wanting us to work together and to build a relationship, and how God was going to use us in the town. And so David and I and Debbie and my wife Jackie, we started meeting together socially, just having a nice glass of red wine and some food, and then we'd pray and maybe worship together, and just created a friendship, got to know each other, enjoyed one another's company, shared some common experiences. And then this led to our two churches, Assemblies of God, bottom of Lawford Road, which is a fairly small church, so the building generally coming up to St Matthew's, which was much bigger physically. And we'd have joint services of worship and praise, and we'd invite also other speakers to come in. But basically, we just enjoy our two churches worshipping together. And so the relationships were being built. Again, there were no activities other than that worship. As we were having these services, obviously David and I had relationships with other church leaders in the town. And there was a couple of house churches in the town. I won't go into the long history, but we'd got friendships with them. And they both the leaders of those churches asked if they could join in our united acts of worship. And so they came along, worshipped with us, relationships developed between the pastors and spouses again. They started to meet with us for a glass of wine, plenty of food to eat. And it was just a picture of heaven, really, you could say. But what we also saw is that these two leaders of the house churches that joined us, they'd actually had broken relationships. They'd split up a few years before. And after one of our united services, joint services, they had a healing of their relationships where they confessed sin to each other and hurts that they'd experienced. And their differences and their relationships were resolved through a move of God in their lives. And so that extended the circle of church leaders meeting, and we started having more services. We had the opportunity to invite international speakers to some of our services, people like Bill Johnson from Reading, and Wes Campbell from the Vineyard, and Peter Helms, who was on the international team for YWAM. And we had some amazing times of worship in St Matthew's. But over a period of time, as we were meeting together over these aforementioned glasses of wine, we decided it would be good just to test the water to see how many other church leaders might be interested in becoming involved. And so we started giving out invitations, and we started having our breakfast meetings, and we started inviting individuals to join with us in prayer and sharing and breakfast. And we didn't do it in any kind of organized way. We just were seeking to be led as to who would share our vision and become part of it. And we focused on church leaders. We wanted to get in people who led congregations and people who could make decisions on behalf of their congregations. And by 2003, this group meeting for breakfast included a lovely godly man, Philip Sainter, who was the Roman Catholic priest at St. Mary's, Mark Beach, liberal Anglican rector of St. Andrews, Steve Hall, pastor of Bilton Evangelical Church. And we just continued meeting for breakfast, worshipping and praying together and building relationship. That relationship was far more important than our theology. And Mark Beach was a key figure in many ways because his theology was very different to all the rest of us, including Philip Sainter, the Roman Catholic priest. And yet he was big enough to accept the being part of a group that wasn't his natural home. And because of his openness, we were able to receive him and share in fellowship with him. And then as this group grew, the traditional ecumenical activities were going on. And one of the things that they had was a united service during the week of prayer for Christian unity in January. And that had happened every year for many years. And as I say, the many nonconformists in the house church, new churches, were not involved in this at all. But as this gathering for breakfast grew, we actually decided, and we encouraged everyone to be part of this service, which happened to be at St. Mary's that year. I think it probably was 2003. And we managed to encourage all the church leaders, first of all, during the service, to process through a prayer tunnel where some of us prayed for them. And then the church leaders formed a prayer tunnel down the nave, and the whole congregation, which would have been over 200 people, went through this prayer tunnel. And I just want to quote to you something that Mark Beach wrote. I'm going to refer to this later. Mark wrote a little booklet about the history of Revive in 2012, and this is how he describes it. He says this: at this service, the high point was a prayer tunnel in which many ministers and church leaders formed a tunnel through which the congregation passed and were prayed for by the ministers. The Greek Orthodox priests made the sign of the cross over their heads. Others prayed in tongues. And one simply said, "Good evening," and shook everybody's hand as they passed. And that's a pretty accurate description of the breadth of ministerial styles and traditions. And I think that was a key spiritual moment in the life of the forming of Revive. As the group grew, we did start then talking about what we might do as churches together. And one of the principles that we agreed on was that not everyone would want to join in everything. And the fact that some people did something that another church didn't approve of or didn't want to be part of, that was okay. Being part of this move of God didn't mean we all had to agree with everybody and do everything, because we were still in relationship. How's my time going? I've got to finish soon, have I?
No, you're absolutely fine, Martin. I don't know what.
Okay, thank you, Paul. I'll keep going then.
This is good stuff.
We began to formalise what our understanding was of what was happening. And it's interesting, looking at the Revive website, it still has the same wording that we came up with 16 years ago. On the Revive website, it says this: Revive is a move of God among the churches of the borough of Rugby, which has been demonstrated in growing trust and developing relationships between church leaders, renewed vision for the church's mission in the area, the emergence of new projects, and the commitment of churches to work together for the cause of the kingdom. One word that you might miss in that definition of what Revive is about is the word borough. We specifically put in borough of Rugby. It would have been so much easier to put the town of Rugby. We tried to involve the surrounding villages as well. We invited their ministers in. We even set up a subgroup called Rural Revive that used to meet and have their own breakfast together, because there was a feeling amongst the churches in the villages that the townies ignored them and didn't understand them. And so we encouraged them to meet together for mutual support and encouragement. Sadly, after a few years, that did fizzle out. But again, back in 2004-05, we defined our vision to know Christ and make him known through empowering individual Christians and churches. We aim to encourage each Christian to develop the heart and mind of a disciple, to encourage the community of God's people in the Rugby area to work together to fulfill the Great Commission, and to encourage each church to reach out appropriately and effectively to the wider community, reflecting their own character. And with this increasing understanding of who we saw ourselves to be, we came to the point where we felt there needed to be a formal launch. We came up with the word revive. I'm not sure exactly when we came up with that word, but we certainly used it for our launch. Our formal launch which was in September 2005, where we had 140 people representing over 40 churches at the West Indian Centre in Edward Street. No, not the West Indian, the Indian Centre in Edward Street, with a wonderful curry cooked for us by Ish Mistry, who many of you will have come across, who was incidentally a great supporter of what was happening on. One of the first things we did, actually, I'd forgotten about this, was in the millennium, we actually organised a party in the park. So this would have been the 4 churches took the initiative on that. And we had nearly 1,000 people in Caldecott Park. We had worship from the band stand, and we ordered a pig roast serving everybody. And it was a great party atmosphere in Caldecott Park all those years ago. As we launched the Revive formally in 2005, we also sought to encourage the remaining groups of churches together to formally come on board. They actually did. I found a document that the town centre churches agreed to kind of come into the move of God known as Revive, and to work together with Revive rather than seeing it as something opposed or counter to what they were doing. In 2006, one minister shared a thought for a mission together in 2007. And so we started to talk about what would that look like. And of course, 40 churches, 40 different visions of what a mission might look like. So we agreed on these principles that were based on our founding principles, really. First of all, that the mission shouldn't be a one-off event, not a week of mission and then forget about it, but it should be a wide range of activities, events and programs that were extended over a long period of time with an ongoing timescale. And we were also clear that those events should reflect the character of the individual churches, the different groupings of churches and the villages, as well as the town. And that these should also be, whatever form they took, they should be seen as serving the local community. So we were coming up with this vision in 2006. And Roy is sitting there thinking, now this all sounds very familiar, because at the very same time, I guess, he was thinking through similar ideas for what became Hope 08, which in 2007, we decided we would follow and align ourselves with Hope 8 that Roy instigated on a national scale. By 2009, I'd been largely leading the steering group and decided it was time to pass on the baton. And by then we'd had a new leader, Michael Bahensky, the Baptist minister, had come into the town, who'd been really enthused by what he discovered as a new minister in the town. And he took over the leadership of the steering group and brought in some more formalized structures, and the leader became a convener, and we started having more kind of formal minutes and agendas than we'd had before. And as Revive grew, it did become necessary, I think, to involve more representatives in the kind of organizational side of Revive. But Revive, I believe, will only continue to thrive when it maintains the foundation of the relationship between the church leaders themselves. And it's great to see so many church leaders still involved in Revive, and I'm thrilled to see what is still going on. There are so many things that have grown out of Revive. Even before Revive existed, we were starting things like Hope 4. Hope 4 started from she wouldn't mind me saying this, an old lady in the congregation of St. Matthew's in her 70s who got a passion for the homeless, and wanted St. Matthew's as a church to look after the homeless of Rugby. And I said, no way, we can't do this on our own. But she had such a wonderful vision. I said, let's share this with others. So she went round to other churches and shared the vision. And eventually it became formalized into Hope For, and so many other ministries which are listed on the Revive website, so key to what is happening on the church Christian scene today in Rugby, but all flowing out of this relationship of church leaders. Ryan's going to share a web link on the chat to a Dropbox folder that I've created, in which I've put a few documents. Actually, in there's a 5-minute video, which is also on the Revive website, which tells the story of what Revive was doing in 2005-06. There's also a copy of Mark Beech's booklet called Revive Rugby, A New Ecumenism. There's a press release of when we launched in 2005 and a leaflet that we produced about Revive in 2009. So do follow that link to Dropbox from the chat and download that stuff for yourself and have a read through. But I think I've probably said enough for now if we are to have any questions or corrections, David.